Advertising is everywhere, and its intention is not simply to sell you things, but to capture and resell your attention. Technology expert Tim Wu says it's just the latest phase in a long evolution of advertising, and for all the problems it's created, the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. Tim Wu, author of The Attention Merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our heads, and he joins us now for more. Welcome back to our studio.
It's great to be
back. You were here several years ago.
I was, yeah.
And I always like to say to you when you visit here, I like to say welcome home, even though I know you live in New York, but you know, you're from these parts, or you spend a lot of time here.
I grew up in Toronto.
Yeah.
This is my home.
There you go. We're going to start with an excerpt from the book where you covered the idea of education starved for funding, needing revenue, and where to find it, showing ads to students. Here we go. There was once a time when, whether by convention or technological limitation, many parts of life, home, school, and social interaction among them, were sanctuaries, sheltered from advertising and commerce. Over the last century, however, we have come to accept a very different way of being, where nearly every bit of our lives is commercially exploited to the extent it can be. As adults, we are hardly ever unreachable, seldom away from a screen of some kind, rarely not being solicited or sold to. From this perspective, the school administrators are merely giving students a lesson in reality, exposing them to what is, after all, the norm for adults. I want to find out about how many schools actually take up the advertisers on their offer to pay them to get their stuff in front of students' eyeballs.
Yeah, well, I mean, an increasing number in the United States, mainly in school districts that are poor. I want to make this clear. There's some in California, some in Minnesota, other parts in the South. And the basic thing is they say, funding is tough. These are win-win deals. But ultimately, what the schools are doing is reselling their students' attention to corporate advertisers. And it's kind of at odds, I would say, with the educational mission.
They say it's a win-win, but is it a good idea to be selling, in particular, Snickers bars to poor kids, getting the advertisers out in front of them?
I think there's a certain blindness. This is the problem. I mean, all of us look at advertising revenue. We go, it's free money. What's the big deal? Yeah. Just a couple ads, and we get all this money. And so the schools have been like, we're so hard up. That's fine. We'll just do this, and we, it's a win-win free money deal. But I think we have a problem with being addicted to free stuff, frankly, and something I talk about in the book.
Well, let's pursue that. The consequences of this kind of omnivorous, omnipotent, omnipresent advertising, in your view, is what?
Well, I think there's several effects. So first of all, it just makes us buy more stuff. So it does come at some cost. But I think more profoundly, and this is something the book explores, I think it warps all of our environments to be better for advertising. So let's think of the web, for example. The web these days has been set up to make you click wildly when you get on there and spend all your time going here and going there. The stories are shorter, clickbaity. And I think ultimately, not only does it make the medium different, it has its implications for us reading all this stuff, constantly being sucked into vortexes. You can see that we're all distracted, we can't concentrate, people can hardly sit still for 3 minutes. It's very clearly having consequences for all of us.
Does it happen to you too?
Oh, absolutely.
You're not immune.
This is why I wrote this book.
You can't filter it out.
Well, I'm not a Superman. I'm like anyone else. One of the reasons I wrote this book, I think, is that feeling, have you ever done this? You decide you're going to write one email, sit down at the computer, suddenly 3 hours are gone, and you're just like, what happened? That sense that I was sort of losing control over my own choices, over my own attention, over who I was becoming, made me write this book. So I'm not immune. I try to use methods to keep myself in control, but it's not easy.
Here's a nice Latin expression, homo distractus.
Yeah.
That's yours.
It describes,
what does it mean?
It describes present-day humanity, that we've sort of evolved past a certain point where we were a little more focused or concentrated, and into a state we can't focus on anything for more than seconds at a time. Something might be better. Hard to get tasks done. I don't want to blame all of advertising for it, but it's certainly a fact of our current existence.
Another expression you like, attention harvesting. What's that?
That refers to a business model where, as opposed to making money by selling a product, you gather an audience and sell them to advertisers. It used to be confined to the media. These days it's in everything, Facebook, Google, you name it.
When were the first ad-supported products introduced?
So by my research, the 1830s, so quite a while ago, New York City, the penny press newspapers, who didn't make money selling, the cover price was a penny, so they didn't make money on that. They made all their money gathering up with crazy sort of tabloid-style news, gathering a big audience, reselling it to advertisers.
And we are addicted now. It started 200 years ago, and we're addicted.
I think we have I think we have a culture where we expect a lot of things to be free, whether it's free maps on Google, whether it's social networks, whatever it is, videos on YouTube. But I think ultimately we end up paying anyhow, whether it's our state of distracted minds, whether it's buying more stuff that we don't need. We are opening ourselves to a lot of influence and giving away a lot of private information. And I think that is the cost of free.
Are we at the point of no return?
No, I don't believe that. I'm an optimist. Over the history of the media, there have been revolts against advertising. They happen about every 30 years. There was one during the Great Depression, another during the 60s. And it is possible for us to renegotiate the terms of the deal. We just have to say, this is too much. We don't want advertising in schools. We don't want the web to be all clickbait. We need something different.
Let's do another excerpt from the book. Here we go. The church was the one institution whose mission depended on galvanizing attention. And through its daily and weekly offices, as well as its sometimes central role in education, that is exactly what it managed to do. But over the 20th century, organized religion, which had weathered the doubts raised by the Enlightenment, would prove vulnerable to other claims on and uses for attention. Offering new consolations and strange gods of their own, the commercial rivals for human attention must surely figure into this decline. Attention, after all, is ultimately a zero-sum game. Can you draw a direct line from the rise of advertising to the downfall of religion?
I don't know if a direct line, but I think they're certainly correlated. I think the only institution that really cared what we were thinking and doing before the 20th century was the church, organized religion. The 20th century, government and commercial advertisers got into the game. They started, advertisers and TV channels wanted people watching prime time, right, every day, sitting down and constructing different rituals. Those rituals began to conflict with religious rituals, and I think more or less commerce has won.
I think it's fair to say 3 or 4 decades ago that advertisers used to just sort of, in the main, blast it out there, and whoever they managed to catch in this big net, great. Now we have targeted advertising as one would never imagine.
Right.
I presume that's far more effective, isn't it?
People believe it's so. On the other hand, we've gotten so good at ignoring advertising, you have to factor that in. But, if you get something, I don't know your taste that well, but they seem to include purple ties. So if they know you're a man, you like purple ties, white shirts, and they get that exact, variation just a little bit better, obviously it's going to appeal to you. Targeted advertising is so effective because it gets your attention. You're only interested in the car if you want to buy a new car, or beer if you drink beer. But if you are, for example, about to have a new child, suddenly you are on the look for cribs. Like that's when a crib ad will really get your attention.
Absolutely.
And that's targeted advertising.
So consumers in that respect are better off with targeted ads. It's in their interest, actually, to like targeted ads.
That's the theory. I have some doubts about that theory. Sometimes it's in your interest, sometimes it's exploiting your vulnerabilities. Let's say you have a gambling problem and you start getting ads for casinos. Yes, you like casinos, but you'd rather try to resist it. Let's say you can't resist buying every new gadget. Well, you're going to get a lot of gadget ads. There's one story I read, a man in the United Kingdom and contracted pancreatic cancer, suddenly started getting ads for funeral homes. That's not the kind of thing you want. Yes, it's targeted. Yes, I guess I'm interested in my own funeral, but probably prefer not to hear about
It's
that.
a bit gross.
Yeah.
What's the weirdest ad you've ever seen targeted at you? Do you know?
Oh, for some reason, Facebook thinks I'm Jewish. So they're
Because you look Jewish.
I don't know, but they're always like, Jews. I think it was like, why don't you join Jews for Donald Trump or something? They get it wrong.
Would paying for content help?
I think it would help tremendously. I think that people of my generation who grew up thinking everything should be free kind of have to suck it up and be like, look, if we want the stuff to be better, we got to pay for it. If you don't pay for it, you're going to get clickbaity, lurid, sensationalist nonsense trying to get you to click on stuff or trying to make you watch stuff. Compare commercial television and paid television or government-supported television. There's a huge difference.
There is in quality, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a huge difference in quality, and you get the media environment you pay for. I just believe that now.
How do you make that argument to people who think, A, they don't have enough money to pay for everything they want, and B, anybody who wants money from them in what we're accustomed to receiving for free is probably out to screw me.
You know, I think we got to think about it like food. There was a period not too long ago where the only thing with food is how fast and how cheap. And I think it made us extremely unhealthy. You know, and I think the same with media. The thing has been like, how free is it, you know, and how convenient is it? There are better experiences. You feel better after reading a book or watching quality television than you do after sitting around, you know, channel surfing or clickbaiting for an hour. I just think you can tell for yourself the difference.
What do you do about the argument which would suggest that the only way lower income people are going to be able to afford these niceties of life is if we keep it as free as possible?
Well, I just don't believe that. I mean, people of all income classes spend a lot of money on media. When you look at cable subscriptions, unless you're in extreme poverty, you know, the average North American actually already spends a lot. They could just spend a little bit smarter.
Do you think people are open to paying a portion of the cost of whatever it is they want? Let's do this. Let's say satellite radio.
Yeah.
Satellite radio, you've got to pay whatever, $25, $30 a month for that. And there are ads on it as well.
Right.
What are people's attitudes towards that?
I personally don't like it when something both makes you pay and then also runs the ads at you. I think you need to be, you know, that's a good example of greed gone wrong. You're trying to essentially double charge for things. So I think producers need to, I think there needs to be a revolt among consumers where they say, listen, we want more high quality paid stuff and we don't want it mixed with advertising, because then any content that's serving advertisers is always serving two masters. They'll always have to warp it to try to make it better as an advertising platform.
We had a bit of it in this country, actually, when one of the channels on CBS, one of the stations, I guess, on CBC Radio, mused about putting commercials on.
Right.
And loyal CBC Radio listeners who have been accustomed not to having ads for decades now actually rose up and said no.
Right.
And they were listened to, and it didn't happen. Right. I presume you want to see more of that.
I think consumer
How do we make that happen?
Well, we talk about it. I think consumer revolts are a crucial ingredient in trying to make a better media environment happen. And it just starts by people realizing they have options, they can quit, that they understand things like using ad blocking or subscribing as sending a message. I think the success of some of the companies like Netflix, which are all ad-free, sends a message. That's what I think. I think you can vote with your dollars as well as vote with your voice.
Are we too invested in the Facebooks and Twitters and so many of these things in our lives now? And they're very good. Of course, you're on Facebook all the time, I'm sure. And they're very good about having a personal message off the top, and then the second box down is an ad, and you might not even realize it, right? They're so good at surreptitiously sticking those in there. One
direction I think we're moving into, people hate advertising, try to avoid it. I think a lot of advertising is becoming more secretive, surreptitious, and it's something that I am concerned about personally, because it's often very subtle forms of influence over us. Like anyone else, I can't stay away from Facebook. I like my friends' children. I want to see what they look like. I would like to be able to pay for those services. It would be cheap. Facebook, they calculated, be less than $1 a month to be on Facebook. No ads. I prefer, and like no data collection. I would just be a deal. I'll give you $1. No data collection on me. Don't, you know, keep a file on my daughter or myself. I'll give you $1. Let's call it quits.
Is that possible?
They could do it.
They could do it. How do you make it happen?
Enough people say this is what we want.
And they would listen.
I hope so. You got to start somewhere. I mean, it starts with boycott movements, it starts with demands. At some point, if you have an alternative, a competitor to Facebook that says, listen, we're privacy protective, we don't resell your data, we're not sneaky, but we charge $1 a month, I think a lot of people would choose that.
Where, in your view, is the most kind of egregious example of a surreptitious insertion of advertising in a place where you think it ought not to be?
That's a great question. There's starting to be advertising in national and state parks in the United States. State parks is where they've led. And I somehow find that because state parks were designed to be refuges from commerce, the idea that you'll be in the wilderness and there's branded advertising or branded trails, somehow to me that just bothers me as like being the opposite of what those spaces are for. Another one I'll say, there's been a trend in the United States towards product placement in sermons and churches.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, movies, I know. Churches?
Churches. So
like what?
Actually, product placements for movies. So, for example, the last Superman, Man of Steel movie when it came out. The pastors were, treated to all these things. They gave them notes. Jesus, the first superhero. So there's been efforts to, as I said, put product, and that seems to me that it just seems to me if that is a sacred space, obviously, and
Supposed to be.
It's supposed to be, couldn't be more in tension with the idea of the Christian religion.
So you really believe there can be ad-free spaces in this society?
I think we must have ad-free spaces if we're going to, or at least media-free spaces, spaces that have just a very different kind of purpose. The family dinner table, friends hanging out at a bar, where the purpose is human contact, not loaded with an extra message, uncorrupted spaces. And, I'm not saying you can't watch TV or have fun or do things, but at least some part of our lives, I think we need to draw boundaries.
I remember driving down the Gardiner Expressway, big expressway on the waterfront of Toronto, several years ago, and looking to my right and seeing a beautiful grassy knoll and a floral design, and I thought, oh, isn't that beautiful? And then I realized it was a corporate logo for something. And somebody paid to obviously have their corporate logo put there on the beautiful grass beside one of our expressways.
Yeah.
There's no ad-free space. It feels like there's no ad-free spaces left.
Let me say another challenging area, which is the classroom. I'm a professor. I've had to very severely ban all laptops in the classroom so that people will talk to each other. Human connection, we have a lot of time to talk to each other through machines, whatever. I really prize, as I said, human connection, at least some quiet spaces for contemplation. It's important to know that you're making some decisions that are really yours. I also think it feels better. At first it's painful, you start pushing for your phone, but if you have rules for yourself, if you program your own life, you can maintain your sanity.
That view is catching on. We've had more professors at more universities here start to say, computer-free zone, leave your cell phone at home. This was great. Tim Wu, author, The Attention Merchants, The Epic Scramble to Get Inside Our Heads. Thanks so much for visiting us again at TVO.
Sure, a pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.